Good, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Love you too.
Well, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Let me thank you for being here. Let me thank you for continuing with the resistance, because I come from Oakland and Berkeley, California, 13th Congressional District. Of course, I say the heart, and it is the heart and soul of the resistance movement. And so we have today a phenomenal panel. And I'm not going to talk long at all because I want you to hear from our panel. And we're talking about intersectionality. And these are individuals who understand it, who get it, and know the power of intersectionality. And as a member of Congress, what I am doing, and of course you know I have to make sure we do what we need to do so we can do what we have to do next year. And we have to continue to resist this un-American Trump agenda until we do the work where that's no longer with us, if you know what I mean. And we're doing that. You just see what's taking place. And it's just a moment for us to come together and really realize and understand our collective power. And it's our collective power that is going to not only resist what is taking place, but it's going to help us move forward with a progressive agenda that speaks to the aspirations of everyone. And we've got to unravel a lot, yes, but we have to build, and we have to build this progressive movement. And the notion of intersectionality as a framework, and we saw this emerge, the rest of the world saw this during the Women's March and the phenomenal organizing that took place and the success of the Women's March. And we need to understand what that meant and what that means in our lives and what that means for our communities and what that means for the nation. And so thank you again for being here. I am Barbara Lee from the Bay Area. I don't know if I said that or not, but that's me. And I want to now bring forward our moderator, who is a good friend, who was the former executive director of the Congressional Black Caucus. She exemplifies Black girl magic. Totally, she's our voice in many respects with the media. And she's a person who understands the importance of an inside-outside strategy. She not only worked for the Congressional Black Caucus, she was a senior advisor and counsel to the House Committee on Homeland Security under the leadership of Chairman Benny Thompson. She co-founded Impact, which is a nonprofit organization that is encouraging young professionals in economic empowerment, civic engagement, and political involvement. So since Angela has left the Hill, she has become a major political commentator and somebody who you can rely on to share our views when others are talking about much of nothing. So Angela, where's Angela? Come forward, and thank you again for being here. And she's doing the heavy lifting today.
Good morning still for 13 minutes, everybody. How are you? Good morning. It's a quiet room. This is a resistance panel. We need y'all to be awake. Don't act like you just stay woke. Act like you work woke. That's what we do nowadays. Right, Elisa? Okay, so what I would like to do, because we have some dynamic panelists, we have 3 sections of the conversation today, just so you all know what we're doing. We're going to talk about the Women's March, which is very important, significant. We have 2 of the chairs of the Women's March who are joining us today. Linda's here. Tamika hasn't joined us just yet, but that is going to be an amazing part of the conversation. We may start with that second because I want to make sure that we give our sister time to join the conversation. But you all, this is serious. We have 2 of the co-chairs here to talk to us. That's a big deal. Let's give them a round of Tamika! Tamika just joined us. Okay, well, let me finish my homework. But yes, you will be able to give her a round of applause in a minute because I'm going to introduce these lovely folks. We also have a section of the conversation where we're going to talk about Black Lives Matter, period, but Black Lives Matter in the era of Trump as well. I might just call him Orangey because y'all know that's not my president. Well, he's not my president. You all can play footsie with him if you want to. But I'm not going to do that because this is the resistance panel. Like, I can't dress for this. You know what I'm saying? Like, come on. Okay, and then finally, we're going to have a conversation on intersectionality. And we have someone who is truly a hero to me to lead us in that conversation, reading about this concept of intersectionality while I was in law school, and then to see her, to lay eyes on her today was thrilling. That's Kimberly Crenshaw. And I can't wait to have that part of the conversation. And right when I was getting ready to go into intros, I looked up and I saw someone who is another shero and sister friend of mine, who I love dearly and in so many ways aspire to be like her, and that's Melissa Harris Perry. Can we please give a round of applause to Melissa? She needs to be up here too, y'all. She needs to be up here. Melissa, I'm serious. Melissa has been in many ways the face of the resistance when mainstream media can turn our back on us. Right, we know that we can count on Melissa to give us the real, the raw, and unadulterated truth, and we thank you for that because it's opened doors for all of us up here. So thank you, Melissa. Okay, so let us get started. Tamika Mallory, who joined us last, but certainly not least, is an activist, national co-chair for the Women's March. They have wonderful bios, and I encourage you all to look them up online afterwards, just so that we can jump into the conversation. I'm just saying this is the resistance, so we're going to do this a little different. Linda Sarsour, activist, national co-chair for the Women's March as well, is joining her to her left. We have Kimberly Crenshaw, professor of law at Columbia and UCLA, and the executive director and co-founder of AAPF, which stands for, Professor Crenshaw, please tell me. I just want to make sure we do this because I did not know, and I don't want to be ignorant up here trying to educate y'all. That's not a good look. We have Amelia Gonzalez Avalos, executive director of Navigate MN. Is that for Minnesota? Yes, acronyms that work. Yeah, you all know about. And then we have Alicia Garza, who is the co-founder of Black Lives Matter. Yes. I'm going to get there. Congresswoman's like, you're going to tell everybody where she's from. Yes, so Alicia just said it. I don't have to do it now. Oakland. I'm going to say, West Side. That's what I do. That's what I do. She's the special programs director at National Domestic Workers Alliance as well. And last but not least is my good brother friend, Rashad Robinson, who's the executive director of Color of Change, who always keeps us together. Thank you, Rashad. Okay, so let's talk about this. So we know the resistance did not begin on Election Day. But we know that for so many of us, for too many of us, the realization that staying woke was like a real thing, and like an alarm bell went off and we needed to pay a little bit closer attention, and maybe the Black Lives Matter girls, right? That's what it was before, right? Didn't have, but they had it right. Maybe we should have been paying attention. And so, thankfully, there were a few good women, who rose up to this challenge of saying, you know what, the resistance doesn't just have to look black or brown or white or Native American folks from Indian country, but it may need to look a little diverse because we've got a big fight on our hands. And so Tamika and Linda, Bob Bland, Carmen Perez, also a good sister friend of mine, Janae Ingram, worked together to ensure that we would come together, have a seat at the table, Tamika talks about often, for this Women's March. We often talk about feminism in this country and the very challenged history it's had. But you all were able to lay aside many of the heavyweights that we've carried decade after decade, whether it's our mothers, our grandmothers, great-grandmothers, or present day, to come together to resist this administration. And so I want you all just to give this audience a little bit more on some of the challenges that you faced organizing the march and what we can look forward to, because you were able to persist and therefore resist, and now there's a second phase of this. For those of you all or any of your friends that thought they were gone, don't call it a comeback. They've been here. Tamika, help us. Linda, help us.
So I'm going to just turn the mic over to Linda because she burns down microphones. But first of all, I just want to thank everyone who's in this room and to Congresswoman Lee for being such a stalwart. And, you know, when we were going through a lot of pain around the Women's March, we were able to call Congresswoman Lee on her cell phone morning, noon, and night to talk through how to navigate all the stuff that was happening. And she was an ear and gave us some real strong and hard advice at times. And I just want to tell you that we appreciate you publicly. Thank you so much. And I know I can't take a lot of time to thank folks, but when you're in public, you have to say thank you to people so folks know. And, you know, people try their best to say that there is no relationship between the activists and all this other crazy stuff. But I can tell you that Alicia Garza, when we called her and said, we need you to help us with this, she did everything possible to ensure that we had the support we need and that the sisterhood was there. And I want to thank you also, Alicia. And then Angela has no choice but to help us, because if not, we go to her house and sit on her couch and stuff and make her do stuff because she's our sister girl. But there's one person in this room, and I think this is really an example of when you say what were the challenges that matters really the most to us and what we did, and that is Kimberly Crenshaw. And the reason why is because the term intersectionality is what took us over. That's what got us through. When people kept saying, black folks were like, I'm not going to that. White women have problems. They need to march by themselves with their mamas and others and work it out. We are tired. We've been marching. And, you know, y'all crazy for even being over there with them. And it was a lot of stress around that. And then, of course, you know, just dealing with bringing race up in a room full of people who don't look like you was also very difficult. But what we kept going back to get 5 million people to respond worldwide was intersectionality, and really breaking down for folks how you can put your issue to the side. Not that you have to put it down completely, but let's try to focus on humanity within others and look at other issues and how all these things come together. You know, we talked about the fact that it is not that these issues are happening sort of in a vacuum. It's really not a silo. All of this stuff is happening at the same time, and people of all races actually are catching hell and going to catch even more hell in this hour. And so because of that, we were able to get people who you would never see walking anywhere together, talking to one another, or even caring about one another's issues to the table for January 21st. And so while that was an incredible moment, and we are just, you know, it was very historic and all the things that you've seen, it would mean nothing if we did not turn that 5 million number into some type of action on the ground. And so the real work is what I'll let Linda talk about, because that's what she does every day in terms of really trying to keep people motivated to continue to move. And I think you mentioned Bob Bland, but I do want to say that in reference to, you know, knowing that there is a woman who is not a black woman, not a woman of color in this space, who's really, really saying, I have been upholding white supremacy in this country, and now I want to find ways to go to my people and try to get this thing straight. She has done that, and we hope that you encourage Bob when you see her, because sometimes black folks be hard on Bob. Real hard on her, and she understands that she has answered the call. But when you see Bob and she's in your space, we ask you to support this sister, because she really is trying to do the work to ensure that people come to the table lifting up our issues and knowing that they have actually participated in our oppression. So Linda, I'll let you go and talk about where we go from here in the 100 days after the march, really.
Thank you, and I'm deeply honored and humbled to be here, and thank you to Congresswoman Barbara Lee and Congressman Keith Ellison, who's my Muslim brother from Minnesota. I think I just wanted to add something to Tamika, what Tamika said before we go forward, is that we took one for the team. And, you know, it was not an easy space, and what people saw on January 21st, you didn't see what was happening the 7 weeks before January 21st happened. And, you know, that march could have happened without me, Tamika, and Carmen. It could have happened without women of color. It could have happened without black women. People would have went out into the streets and marched. So the idea was, if they were going to go out and march anyway, we were not about to let a group of white women set an agenda for all women in America. And if we weren't going to be at the table, our issues were definitely not going to be at the table. Ain't nobody bringing up your issue if you're not there. And what we said was, oftentimes we say this, and Tamika taught me this, people say, oh, we want a seat at the table. We didn't want a seat at the Women's March table. We wanted to be on top of the table, and if we weren't going to be centered in the way that was going to give us influence and power, we weren't going to be at the Women's March. And I hope that people saw, and nothing's perfect, and the movements have always been messy, but the idea that we were able to center Black women voices, Native women, Muslim women, that we were able to bring the mothers of the movement to that stage so that white women across America can see the pain and trauma that our communities have been feeling for a long time, way before there was ever a Donald Trump, was really important. And I feel like, at least from that perspective, we did succeed, and we did put forth who we are as a nation and what we believe we can be and the potential. And moving forward, we have to stay the course. This is not about a one-off, we could do a march, everybody felt great, and that's amazing. I felt fabulous on that day. But the work the work continues. And the Women's March is now a C4 organization. We are a political advocacy organization, and we're also a C3, so we're a foundation. One of the things that we want to do with our platform is we have a big platform. We've got millions of people across the country that we can connect to. So how do we continue to use our platform to shine light on the work that has been happening way before there was ever a Women's March? And a lot of people started knowing about me and Tamika on January 25th. I've been doing this work. Tamika been doing this work. I've been doing this work since the ashes of 9/11 in a community that has been marginalized and targeted and has suffered in silence for 16 years. And all of a sudden, everybody thinks that there's Muslims in America. Muslims have been here before there was a United States of America. So moving forward, I just want to talk a little bit about Detroit. So the Women's March is going to Detroit in October 27th to the 29th. We are very intentional about everything that we do. Why Detroit? Why not, somewhere else? Detroit is a microcosm and represents every issue that we are fighting for on a national level, anywhere from gentrification to poverty to police brutality to immigration and immigrant rights. You name it, it's happening in the state of Michigan. And we're going to Detroit because we want to put our money where people need our money. And we are uplifting Black-owned businesses. We are working with women-owned businesses and immigrant-owned businesses. And we have a local host committee that is working with us that is excited to bring us to Detroit. And what are we going to do in Detroit? We don't want to do a conference where we're sitting here telling you things you already know. It's about how do we leave there with instructions? How do we motivate the people to go back to those towns in Nebraska and rural Alabama, in deep red states where we know there are in the closet progressives that are looking for some motivation and encouragement to get out into those streets and do the work. 2018 is an important year. And I'm going to keep saying that to everybody. And I know Black folks tell me all the time, Linda, liberation ain't going to come from the ballot box. And I agree with you. But I do believe it's part of the puzzle. It's part of building power. And it's a tool that we have been given. And I know as a person who has learned my history, that people died for my right to vote in this country, and that we need to use that and remember those who suffered way more than what we've seen right now to give us that opportunity. So we will be building a platform that is led by women across this country that is based on an issue platform. It's not about supporting women running for office. We're all about women running for office, but for me, it ain't about you being a woman. It's about you standing with our communities and being principled in this moment. So we will be doing workshops, skills-based workshops, interactive workshops, and then on Sunday, we will be doing caucuses with states across the country. We have 50 rooms, 50 states. Go to the caucus, meet people from your state, build some relationships, and go home and commit yourself to working in 2018 to show the white supremacists in the country who's real boss. And I know for a fact that we are the real bosses, but we just got to start acting like it.
And really quick, Angela, I just want to say really quickly, and Melissa, we sent you a text message. You ain't text us back yet. We need you on the 27th.
Wait, hold on. We're not going to call her out. I'm going to give her a mic to respond. We don't do that.
No, that's
Hold
my
on.
girl.
She got receipts, Tamika. That's what you get. I told you she was part of the resistance. Now you know she's going to pull out the phone. Okay. Well, while she's pulling her receipts, Tamika, I have a...
Yes, I did.
Oh, well, she said she got it. She's going to respond to you. But I'm going to ask Melissa to say something, but it's not going to be a response to your text. It's about, the substance of the panel, if she will indulge me on that. But before we move on from this point of Detroit, I want to push back on us in this room, and I want to push back on the convening, not because it shouldn't happen, but here's my issue. Many of us go to our places of worship over the weekend, and we get this high. We feel good for the rest of the week. We come to these conferences. Black people love to conference. For those of you in the room who are not black people, we love to conference. We love to convene. And sometimes, we get this, we're like, oh, we're going out and doing something. What are you going to do Monday? And so I'm pushing back on this because you all have this amazing platform. They came out with 9 things they needed us to do. It was 9, right? 10, I'm sorry. 10 things, fact check. 10 things they needed us to do immediately following the Women's March. And it wasn't 5 million people that followed up. No. They're going to convene in Detroit. How are we going to be a part of ensuring that this convening is not only successful, but the asks and the action items from this convening are successful? So I'd love to know what you all are doing to put in place the metrics that Rashad likes to ensure that we are following up. He just grinned, it's so true. Like, he's like, oh, metrics. We'll let him talk about that in a minute. But I really want to know what you all are doing to hold our feet to the fire to ensure that we're supporting you to do the long-term work that's not always this glamorous, y'all. You ain't going to get your selfie with Linda, 2 weeks after the conference when you're just calling your member. But what can we do to ensure that that happens when they leave here and when they leave Detroit?
That's always the struggle. And we really being intentional about that, about making sure that people walk away with tangible instructions. Oftentimes we're in these spaces and what I feel like we're doing is like a therapy session. Here's all the pain, here's all the trauma, here's all the bad things that happen to our people, but nobody ever tells me what I need to do. So we're hoping that people leave there with instruction, but I will be specific about what kinds of people are going to be there. One of the things that happened at the Women's March is, remember that there were sister marches across this country, right? So there had to be people who organized those sister marches. It wasn't us. We were organizing for Washington, D.C. We also had women who were mobilizing buses to Washington, D.C. So those are 2 separate groups of people. Then we had women who created what we called huddles. One of the things that we don't do well in the movement is we always focus on the national level, everything's a problem, Trump's a problem. The real problem's on the local level. In the hyper-local, like on your street, is the problem. So this is really going to be focused on building very hyper-local power and giving you the tangibles of what that actually looks like. It also is going to put you face-to-face with the people who need you for their survival. So when you're sitting in our conference and you're talking directly to trans folks, we had over 20 trans women who have been killed just in this year. What are we doing about that? Right? But you get to hear and be in spaces with those people. We have 800,000 undocumented people right now, by extension their families, who are literally could be on the verge of a mass deportation right now. We're talking about like new Jim Crow remix on immigrants, right? So you're going to be face to face in a much more intimate space, not a stage on January 21st where there's 1 million people and either you heard or you didn't hear or you didn't see. You're going to feel the pain. And then those people who are the most directly impacted are going to tell you what you need to do. Because the other thing is also we have all these other people and strategists trying to tell us what we need. When the most directly impacted people, they know what you need to do. And that's the people that are going to tell you what you need to do. What we hope comes out of it also is a white paper, basically giving the plan for everyone else who couldn't be at the Women's Convention. But that plan got to come with money. Because in this country, freedom is not free. And the question is, are we as a community and marginalized communities ready to put our money where our mouths is? And don't tell me that we don't have resources in our community. We have plenty of millionaire black people and Muslim people and immigrant people. We got a lot of resources. So we need to be building PACs in 2018. And that's something that we, the Women's March, are talking about right now, a women-led PAC. We're talking about who's running from our community, so we will be doing actually a very intensive training for free for women across this country who want to run for office, connecting them to the donors that they need to be connected to, because in order for us to build power, we got to be in power. You cannot build power with white supremacists in office if you ain't in the decision-making space. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And what I will say, as someone that has organized with many of you in this room and in these communities, the people that push us down the most sometimes are our own people. They don't believe in us. They don't believe in our power. They didn't believe we could come up with the Women's March. They didn't believe the potential that we had. And they actually, a lot of people that were our friends was like, we love you and everything, but we ain't down with what you're doing. But we still went forward, and we were able to show our potential. We raised $4 million. Guess who was the fundraiser? We was fundraising. We did. We went to the people and said, we need you right now. And the people funded us. We took no philanthropic dollars. I said no corporate money. They were like, how are you going to do this in 7 weeks without corporate dollars? I said, I don't care, because I'm not standing behind Coca-Cola or Walmart. Like, I'm just not doing that. And if the people don't want to step up, well, then that's going to be a test for the movement. So we did that without any philanthropic dollars, and we did that without any corporate money. So I know our potential as a community. The question is, are we ready to step up? Because it's not just about building power. It's about our survival. There are people in our communities who will literally not survive under an administration like this one if we don't step up right now.
Thank you, Linda. So Linda mentioned a few times the importance of local, on-the-ground activism, and because of that, Amelia, I want to go to you to discuss some of the local actions that Navigate has taken in Minnesota. Perhaps it can be a blueprint for folks in this room who are engaged in local level activism, or who will be, because they're not going to leave this conference on another high and not doing the work on the ground. So if you can talk to us a little bit about some of the things that you're doing, that would be very great.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Emilia Gonzalez Avalos. I am from Minnesota. I was raised in Minnesota, but I'm undocumented. I came to this country when I was 12 years old. And I ditto everything Linda said. We believe in local work, and although the Dreamers movement and undocumented immigrant rights movement is very strong and is very visible nationwide, because of some of the challenges that we had in existing in a place like Minnesota, where you cannot do anything just with your group of racial identified folks alone, we decided to embark on this project to do things local and become partners of an organization that is a coalition builder that is called Minnesotans for a Fair Economy. Through Minnesotans for a Fair Economy, we are in direct relationship and investment relationship with other groups that do issue-based work, and that includes labor, that includes workers' justice for the working poor with our brothers and sisters from CETUL, tenant rights, it includes revitalizing the communities, and specific in the north area of Minneapolis, where, as many of you know, President Ford took a central station in the nation news. And our role as the hub for immigration justice is to build power, but to be very intentional in the economic analysis. And with that, we had to be very critical of the Dreamer narrative and the way we have those conversations with our community, and specifically with our parents. Because of that, we are in relationship with national groups, and we care, we love, we throw down, but our way that we move our narrative on the ground is perhaps different, and it could be considered radical. But that's how we radically love our community. And in order for us to be successful in the vision that we want to create, we got to speak truth to power every single time and every single day of this work. And we couldn't commit to this aspirational appealing of 800,000 versus 10.5 million. Through this, 1 of every 16 undocumented people. And in the state of Minnesota, where we are home to the largest Somali immigrant and refugee community, to the largest Liberian community, to our state representative, the first Muslim American to be a representative in the country.
Amelia, can you just hold on that one point? I don't know if you missed it. She said Somali and Liberian. Do you know what that means? Somebody just tell me what that, don't you do it, Tamika. I want to make sure the audience is woke. What is that? Who are they? They're black. Okay, so for all of y'all, maybe not in this room, but you might have family members or friends who thinks that DACA or immigration reform overall is a Latino issue, is a brown issue. Tell them the devil is a liar, since we're doing church.
Yes.
That's not true. I'm sorry, Amelia, carry on.
Thank you. And with having this relational work on the ground, we also understand the role in the state when it comes to upholding white supremacy. I don't know if many of you all know that Minnesota is #1 in the rank of racial disparities in the nation. Okay, with that said, one of those, the way that it operates in communities of color, and specifically in black immigrant communities, is through the intersection of an immigration remedy being blocked by encounters with law enforcement. So we don't have enough data to realize or to even know how many black immigrants have lost their immigration status due to these interactions. So the strength of BLM and having those conversations was not only intentional, but really powerful in a way that it changed the consciousness for white rural folks that had that voted for Donald Trump on this pinning against one another tactic that he used. With that said, I recognize that I'm sitting here feeling and and in the shoulders of a lot of the work that Black people have done for liberation. And I just want to acknowledge that I'm checked, that I recognize that as a brown woman who also benefits from white supremacy in ways that are not intentional, but I see it, I acknowledge it, and I use my privilege. And I use my privilege to smash it all together. That being said, undocumented Black people exist. They are in all of our communities, in our municipalities, in our states. Because we engage in direct action, we are in relationship, we do the action, and then we go back and check things. Because we are, the way that the jail system operates in Minnesota, for example, we don't have private prisons. So when an undocumented trans woman of color is incarcerated, they're put in solitary confinement. The average lifespan of an undocumented trans Latina is 34 years old. There are all these other things that as you keep adding intersectionalities, you need to realize that the only way to fight back these issues is to think about a vision that goes beyond the 800,000 that Donald Trump has this data on.
Yeah.
This does not mean that we are against reform. This means that the vision is longer and broader.
Yeah.
But this reform for the 800,000 is yes, but then there's something next to it. That being said, our work in the state is operating through a C3, C4, and PAC, because as undocumented people, we can vote, but we raise money and we're going to endorse people. That's right. We're going to uplift the voices of those candidates who come from our community, who are upholding the values and the principles of working class people, and who have the same vision for the state than us. In Minnesota, we named the national narrative was the DREAM Act. In Minnesota, we name our DREAM Act the Minnesota Prosperity Act, because we were about connecting the prosperity to the aging population of white people that don't think that their livelihoods are connected to ours. So
That's brilliant. I don't know if y'all catching all this, but there's so much enlightenment. That's good political strategy. How many elected officials do we have in here? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Well, Congresswoman, I know you, but you can do this too. 4. Is that ever? There's 4. So we don't have an ALC, we don't have an American Legislative Exchange Council, but I hope we get whatever kind of foundational document here to take that to your home state and introduce that as a bill so we can fix this on the state level while Orangey is playing games in 1600 Pennsylvania. Keep going, Amelia. Change our lives in here, because we're getting completely blessed.
So that being said, we are working for immediate actions to make sure that everybody that has DACA renews by October 5th, while at the same time, we keep engaging in direct action and holding sometimes our friends accountable, because this is the time to be the boldest and bravest version of themselves.
That's right.
Thank you so much. I'm up here with goosebumps, tears in my eyes, and then she broke it down with the legislative strategy. She probably didn't even, these are jewels and gems happening, y'all. I really hope you're catching this, taking notes, Instagram Live, and whatever you got to do so we can get this. Amelia, you talked about benefiting from white supremacy being a brown woman in this country, and that's something that, as an oppressed person, right, that is brave. And that's on a whole different level of honesty. That's something that we can't get many of our white counterparts to acknowledge, even when there's an additional level of benefit when you are rich or when you are middle class. And we certainly know we struggle with getting white folks who are working class to acknowledge that privilege because they feel like, they've been left out. But Alicia, that is to me a perfect point for you to chime in and talk about Black Lives Matter in this era, because so much of it is built upon what we have to combat, and that's white supremacy and racial and systemic oppression in this country. So I just want you to chime in here with, we know where we came from with the movement, but where do we go now? What does Black Lives Matter resistance look like right now? What do people in this room need to know to lean into when they walk out?
Well, let me just start off by saying that the movement is alive and well.
Yes.
And Amelia, when I heard you speaking so powerfully about how power works on our bodies, in our communities, right, and in our legislatures, or how it doesn't work in some cases, I literally had tears. Because a lot of the work that we've been doing for the last 4 years has been about trying to get our movements to understand what actual deep transformative solidarity looks like. That conversation you just opened up was about intersectionality. Intersectionality is not about representation and diversity, and Kim is going to tell you all about that, but it is absolutely about mapping relationships of power, how we perpetuate them and how we are impacted by them. And so anti-Black racism, right, is the Achilles heel to us having a strong, powerful, effective resistance movement. And anti-Black racism exists with Black folks too. Let's keep it 100. Right? So I just was moved by that. And so, you know, a lot of times we have this conversation about where is the movement going, but I just wanted to ground us in, oh, the movement lives. And that's how I know that the movement lives. That's right. Right? Two, I want to just name that the resistance was happening before Trump was elected. That's right. We were fighting Trumpism before Trump became the president of the United States. And what I mean by that is that we were fighting vigilante violence in Minnesota when Black Lives Matter occupiers were shot by white supremacists.
Yes, that's right.
We were fighting xenophobia. Xenophobia being the fear of others. We were fighting for immigration reform that was comprehensive, and by comprehensive, I don't just mean legislatively, I mean all the people who are actually immigrants in this country, right? And we were lifting up the fact that Black folks are also immigrants, okay? We were fighting, right, Trump's assaults and Trump's cronies' assaults on labor and the labor movement. That's right. We've been doing that. And we were fighting how predatory policing strips our communities of self-determination. So in this moment, what the resistance looks like and feels like is not always just protests in the street. That's right. And when we look at places like Charlottesville, we understand very clearly that the right has strategies around our mobilizations. But to fight Trumpism in this moment is not just to fight the orange devil, is what I call him, in the White House. It's also to fight that agenda. It's to fight an agenda of privatization that strips resources out of our communities and then has us fight amongst each other for crumbs and say, oh, well, immigrants are taking our jobs. No, corporations are taking our jobs.
That's right.
To fight Trump and Trumpism in this moment means to fight for an economy that cares deeply for each of us, holds each of our families in dignity, and says that work should have dignity, that we shouldn't be concentrated in low-wage work, that there shouldn't be gaps not just between women and men in the economy, but between women of color and white women in the economy, and white men, right? And to fight Trump and Trumpism in this moment also very, very much means building deep, transformative relationships between communities that are being impacted, understanding that we have to change the balance of power. We can't just keep doing this thing where we're like, okay, we need Muslims here, or we need Latinos here, or we need Asians here. It's like, no. Actually, our agendas need to align. It's not just about having people in the room, because we know even the people who look like us aren't always fighting for us.
That's right.
So intersectionality can never be about representation.
Right.
It can never just be about diversity. It has to always fundamentally be about transforming and challenging power. Now, what has the movement been doing since some folks say you don't see us in the streets that much no more? We all know that the Movement for Black Lives released a policy vision in 2015. 2016?
I don't know.
It already had happened.
That's the bottom line.
And you can find it at visionforblacklives.com. Now, hundreds and hundreds of organizations have signed on and endorsed. I don't see the names of legislators on that list of endorsements. Now, I know my Congresswoman is all up in it, so let me exempt Congresswoman Lee from this acknowledgement, but I want to be really clear that we have legislators out there who are saying Black Lives Matter still doesn't have a policy vision.
Alicia, give me one moment.
Come on now.
Moderator privilege. I'm not going to do this to you.
Okay.
To your comment, but I have to acknowledge the Congressional Black Caucus Chairman and the member representing New Orleans has just joined us. This is Congressman Cedric Richmond, and I want to give him the opportunity to say something. Yes, briefly. He's got to move quick. I don't know if you all know what it's like, but being a CBC chair during the Foundation's annual legislative conference is a tough job. He's got to do this.
Well, I'll make it real quick. I'll do two things. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for the advocacy and the work that you do, and the fact that we take the positions we take, and we don't care who likes them or who it offends, but that is how we're going to move the needle. And for the panelists who take the beatings on social media, that take the criticism in the press, but they're doing it for a reason. That is because this is not a game. We have real lives at stake.
That's right.
And when you talk about do all lives matter or do Black lives matter, it's Black lives being struck down in the street, and it's done with the color of law behind it, and that is the problem. But here's the main fear that I have as a Black man who hates to put on a suit, which means I like to wear tennis shoes and T-shirts, and then you find out what people really think about you. Put on some regular clothes, and you will know. But my concern is that we're almost getting to a legal standard that if you're in an altercation or argument with the African-American male, that you are legally justified in fearing for your life. That's what all the court cases are starting to show, because the argument is, well, I was scared for my life. I thought I was going to die, so I killed him. Well, but he didn't have a weapon. It doesn't matter. He's a Black man. And that we cannot allow to become the norm. And I'll give one of my sheriffs in Louisiana some credit. He's a white sheriff, Black man, walking through the neighborhood with a stick. The guy gets a call saying, hey, somebody's taking pictures of your house. We think he's going to come back and rob you later. The guy gets on the phone with 911, starts driving around his neighborhood looking for the guy. They say, leave him alone. We're coming. We'll ask questions, but you need to go back to your house. He decides not to go back to his house. He stops. He gets in an altercation with the older gentleman and winds up shooting him. And they charged him immediately with aggravated battery and all of those. Now, I would have preferred him be charged with attempted murder.
That's right.
And we're going to keep and continue to make the case. But we have to make sure that the precedent is not set that just because you're an African-American male, you pose a real threat, or it's reasonable for somebody to think that you're a threat to their life just because of your gender and the color of your skin. So thank you all for coming out, and let me just thank the panelists for what you do, and let me run back to where I was supposed to be.
So, Alicia, I want you to pick up where you left off, but I also would love for you to address the fact that Black women...
Oh, you know I was going
Okay,
there.
all right, well, very well.
We wasn't finna let that slide. So, I just need to reclaim my time for 1 second. Excuse me for just 1 minute. Okay, so we've had a policy vision out in the world, been endorsed by hundreds and hundreds of organizations, and we need to see more of our legislators signed on to that vision. We need to see more hearings and meetings happening amongst our legislators about how it is that we carry forward these visionary demands. What the movement has been doing since Trump and his cronies took over, not just the White House, but 2/3 of state legislatures in this country, has been making real the promise of what Black liberation can look like. For example, we did a national bailout action to challenge the practice, the predatory practice of money bail, meaning people sitting in jails because they cannot afford to pay bail. We didn't wait for somebody else to figure it out. We bailed out more than 200 Black mothers across the country to rejoin their families on Mother's Day, and to highlight nationally that bail reform is an incredible issue facing our communities, and to push our representatives and our decision makers to take up the issue of how is it that we de-incarcerate our communities. Because part of decriminalizing Black people is de-incarcerating our communities, meaning getting Black folks out of prisons and jails. Our movement has led the resistance to white supremacy and white supremacists. Charlottesville, Boston, Durham, our folks were on the front lines of that, making sure that when neo-Nazis come to protect statues of the Confederacy, which was not about a way of life, but instead was about maintaining slavery and enslavement, we made sure that we didn't just talk about statues, but that we pointed out that there are living monuments to the Confederacy in our White House and in our Congress. That yes, it is about what's happening in our parks and our town squares, but it's also very much about the living monuments to the Confederacy, meaning people who still want to support and maintain segregation. Seriously. Our movement has also begun to build infrastructure that uses electoral organizing as a weapon for change, not just changing who represents us, but changing how representation happens. You know, we got a lot of pushback and critique after the 2016 election. People said, well, y'all were the ones who got Trump into office. No, let's be very clear. Black folks did the work we were supposed to do. Black folks did the work that we were supposed to do. And so when we talk about post-election analyses where folks say, well, Black people just didn't come out and didn't vote, I have feelings about that. I have feelings about that narrative because ultimately, it denies the fact that this was the first election without the Voting Rights Act. Yes. That this was the first election where there were more barriers than ever before, post-voting rights, to people being able to participate in their communities. And it denies the fact that, quite frankly, to be 100% honest, and I'm just going to open my heart to y'all right now, the options were not fabulous. And by not fabulous, I don't mean this is somebody who I want to come over to my house and have dinner and I want to be friends and go shopping. I mean, can you even acknowledge that there is a discrepancy between whose lives matter in this country? Folks were stuttering when we had to talk about what is your vision for making Black lives matter? Well, I believe all lives matter, somebody said. Another person said, well, white lives matter. Do you understand where I'm going with this? So a lot of us have been talking about, yes, we are and will continue to engage in the process of making sure that we get our people elected to make decisions on our behalf, but we also have to acknowledge and make sure that there are mechanisms for accountability, that there are mechanisms where we are shaping what is the vision and the platform that is being moved? And finally, that there are mechanisms to address how democracy is failing Black communities. Last thing I'll say here, sorry, I know, I had to reclaim my time from.
I know, but now you've reclaimed mine too, sis.
I'm sorry, sis. I think these things are important.
No,
Let me say
you're
one
right,
last
you're
thing.
right, but
Let
we
me
just
say one
got
last
two
thing.
other folks to get in.
My bad.
You're good.
The last thing I want to say here is that we have also been celebrating the folks that we did get elected to state and local offices. We helped to elect the first Somali American to the state legislature, right? So our folks are doing that work. I think the things that we need to be thinking about right now is how do we build on the successes of a movement that is still very much alive. And I hope that Rashad will talk a lot more about that, and so will my sister Kimberly. Thank you.
I just want to take a brief moment to recognize Congressman Bobby Scott, who's just joined us as well from the state of Virginia. Rashad, I want to come to you really with two different pieces that I really want for you to address. The first piece is what the resistance has meant to you personally. I think there are a lot of people who may not be as closely aligned to movement building and organizing in this room or beyond, who think that the days of kind of COINTELPRO operations and the days of threats on our lives and the days of threats on social media, since that's a new part or a new piece, are over. And you've personally experienced some things that I would really like for you to share with people, not to make you afraid, but I think that we need to know so that we can help protect our brothers and sisters and folks who don't identify either way, to ensure that we're protecting their lives and their safety. Because this work is very serious. And he's not the only one up here, but he has a recent example, that he wants to share. I didn't ask anyone else, so if you want to share, please, by all means. And then I'm going to ask you to touch on two campaigns, the one with Jamel Hill at ESPN and with Colin, because I had an interesting, tense conversation on a panel this morning on Roland's show on Colin in particular, and I think it gives us a good opportunity to stand together as communities. Please.
Thank you for that. And I do want to just take a second to just say a little bit about Color of Change as well.
Yes, please.
And so because we were founded about 12 years ago, actually right during this moment, in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, which as we're seeing these other hurricanes, these other disasters that firmly illustrate for us the intersection between corporate power, what we've done to our climate, geographic segregation, generational poverty. When Black people were on their roofs 12 years ago begging for the government to do something and were literally left to die. I know so many of us remember those images, and I just don't want us to ever forget that, because at the heart of Katrina and at the heart of so many of these moments, no one was nervous about disappointing Black people. The government, corporations, media, and when decision makers are not nervous about disappointing your community, we can't get into the magical thinking that we can create a report that will somehow make people see the data, or that Silicon Valley can develop an app, or that we can start a new nonprofit and nonprofit executive direct our way out of this. Movement building requires people power, and it requires narrative change. And so much of what we try to do at Color of Change with translating moments that people are watching and paying attention to into the ability to take strategic action is firmly rooted in the idea that we cannot mistake presence for power. Presence and visibility, awareness, the idea that a Black president changes all the rules, that a Black celebrity that stops the internet when she announces she's pregnant, all of those things are good. Presence is important, but visibility and awareness, diversity without power, all of those things operate against our ability to actually change the rules. Power is the ability to change the rules. Sometimes they are written, and sometimes they are unwritten. And so all of these different campaigns that we try to run, whether it is about challenging the NFL and challenging the powers that be, whether they be the owners who are all white in a league that is over 70% black, or whether it is the corporate powers at ESPN, it is about making sure that the rules are fair, that the rules that are scalable, that impact all of our lives are fair. And so after Charlottesville, Color of Change, and then I'm getting to this question. So we've been involved in a lot of work over the years at really not asking white supremacists not to do what they do, but to challenge institutions that come to our community and say, buy our products and use our services. Whether it was in the aftermath of Trayvon Martin, where we forced over 100 corporations to divest from ALC, leaving them with a $1.5 million budget shortfall, and forcing them to leave their swanky offices in D.C. and move to smaller ones out in Virginia.
That's good.
I'll say that after the election, we rolled out a strategy quite quick. And we said very clearly, not just for Color of Change, but we actually tried to make some demands on the larger movement. We said that we actually have to think and operate differently. President Obama was a change candidate. Donald Trump is a change the rules candidate, and that's a different archetype. Changing the rules means that the ideas that decisions coming from courts might not be implemented the same way. That policy doesn't happen the same way. That sort of going and lobbying your members with facts and figures and personal stories might not actually matter. That we may have disagreed with the politics of previous housing and urban development secretaries, but we knew they knew something about housing and urban development. So changing the rules is a much sort of scarier thing, because it means that we actually have to think differently. And so we sort of put into 3 different categories the type of leadership that we think in this moment. And I want to share this with you because I think it's important as we go back home to think about the type of leadership that's necessary to actually move the ball forward. One is mediators. And I think like 1 to 2% of us should be mediators. Mediators sort of believe the process should work. Maybe after the election, folks were saying 10%, but we've seen what's happened. And so if any more than 5% of us are mediators, we are not actually building a resistance and opposition movement. Second, in terms of a strong opposition movement, is fighters. And that's the 65+% of us that are fighters. And that means fighters hold the line. They are not negotiating, and in fact, they are holding enablers accountable. They are creating the type of desertions and defections necessary to leave this administration isolated. And so that operates itself into the campaign work that Color of Change did, along with our friends with the Women's March, to kick Bill O'Reilly off the air and force advertisers to divest. It's the type of campaign work that we did to force corporations to leave the Trump Business Council and said that you can't come to black folks' money by day and have a relationship with Trump by night. Make a choice now, make a choice quickly, but we are coming if you don't. And then the final is something that we oftentimes don't do very well on the left. And that's the 30% of us that need to be winners. And I don't mean winning an argument, and I don't even mean winning an election. I mean winning real-world victories for people at the local level at this point. And the type of victories that when we come back to people, we are not having a rhetorical conversation about why the left, why the Democrats, why our side is better able to govern. Because this last election really can be illustrated through a movie analogy. Trump was a big-budget Hollywood movie with all those those distractions, those plot twists, you know, where the empire is saved. You don't want to have drinks after that movie with someone that says that couldn't really happen, because you sort of forgive those plot twists in those big-budget Hollywood movies. You're like, that couldn't happen, but it was entertaining. So people forgave a lot of the plot twists in the Trump movie. And on our side, we were the documentary. And I like a documentary, believe me, we sometimes promote documentaries. But the challenge with the genre of the documentary is that if all the things don't line up, people throw out the whole documentary. So if you say you're a documentary standing up for the little guy and at the end it says paid for by Wall Street and Walmart, people will throw out that documentary. And so the question will have to be for our elected officials as we go back home, not what do you say, but what do you do? Words, not action. Not I stand up for the little guy, but are you having Thanksgiving dinner and hearing the voices of Walmart workers and those fighting for 15? Not are you, do you care about criminal justice, or are you willing to stand with Color of Change Change and other activists in the movement for Black Lives that are going around the country right now kicking out DAs, district attorneys who are the most powerful actors in the criminal justice space, and electing DAs who will actually stand up and do the right thing on bail reform, drugs, and all sorts of other things that are happening in our community. Not can you say Black Lives Matter, but will you actually do things that show that you believe that Black Lives Matter? And all of this has come down to the fact that, and it's almost embarrassing to talk about because I saw that NRA video that attacked my sisters over here. I saw the ongoing attacks and op-ed pieces that attack my sisters who founded Black Lives Matter, including Alicia. And for me, at Color of Change, as a person who leads an organization, we have had our addresses, my personal address, put out on Stormfront. We have had to hire the former head of security for the Southern Poverty Law Center to do security for us, and we do not have their endowment. And in the process, have had to think about all new ways to do this work. But that is the work of actually understanding that you are building a type of power. Because after Charlottesville, when we forced Visa, MasterCard, American Express, PayPal, and Apple to cut off funding for a whole list of white supremacist sites, they tried to come for us in a really deep way. Not only did some of them try to get on the phone with us and actually explain why they weren't white supremacists and say that we were making it impossible for them to pay their staff, and I was like, that's the point. But they've made the type of direct attacks that have proven why we ran this campaign in the first place. And so it's not simply about us going at and saying people shouldn't be white supremacists. It's not us saying stop this. It's not even us going hat in hand to Trump. It's about us directing our marches and our energy at the people for whom showing up actually matters.
That's right.
For showing up to the corporations who say they want to be in relationship with us, to the allies who say that they are on our side, and holding them accountable. And that's how we build the type of strategic action that will get us out of this mess that we have put ourselves in many different ways, and actually build the type of transformative movement that brings about not just electoral change, but the type of change that makes people's lives better.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you, Rashad. So now I'm going to turn to Professor Crenshaw. I really want you to explain to the audience the concept of intersectionality. And when you think about where we are right now, the importance, I believe, now more than ever, of us being intersectional in our movement building, the same type of movement building we've seen with the Women's March, the same type of movement building we heard Amelia talk about, what Alicia is talking about, what Rashad is talking about. Why is that so important right now?
Thank you for that question. I have to say, sitting here with these heroes of mine, I feel really blessed. And I especially want to say something about Congresswoman Lee in response, actually, to this question. So many ideas, I think, if we can weave them together, they constitute the response. So Alicia was saying that intersectionality is about building transformative relationships. We heard about the need to recognize women's leadership. We heard about the need to acknowledge from ground up what anti-Black racism has done to our movement. I want to pull all that together and talk about what anti-Black patriarchy has done to our movement, to our capacity to move forward. So I want to tell you all a story about when I first met Congresswoman Lee. It was at an event, maybe 2000, I'm not going to tell you when it was, but it was back around the time when the vote around the Iraq War had happened. And there were, if I'm not mistaken, 2 people who had, as one of the panelists at this event said, had the testicular fortitude to stand up to this warmongering. And when I walked into the space, it was in the green room in the back, and here was the picture. all of the named men, and I could, if you just threw out some names of famous, important black male leaders, y'all know who I'm talking about. They're all standing over in a corner in the male leadership space. And the one person who has actually done something that was meaningful in that moment was sitting in a table by herself. I mean, I could not believe that this was actually happening. Now, I say that to say a couple things. What would have happened if leadership had been defined in terms of the courage to recognize that this march to war was an unmitigated disaster that we would be paying for in spades for the rest of our lives? What would leadership have looked like if our community had used that opportunity to actually think in real terms about what really mattered to the future of our country and to our future, instead of the backslapping, you know, we're all in the club kind of approach? I say that to say this. Many of the relationships that we have to think more critically about and transformatively about are the relationships between us in our own community. We need to be able to understand how many of our own intersectional failures have been the conditions of possibility that brought this moment about. So let me say a few of them.
Come on.
Alicia talked about how this election was the first election that had happened since the Voting Rights Act was gutted. It's also building on Supreme Court decisions that turned elections basically into a marketplace.
Come on.
And the people with the most money win.
Come on.
Now, Rashad talked about rules. Rule changes made that possible, right? So if there had been the Voting Rights Act, if there had been limitations on campaign financing, we probably wouldn't be sitting here bemoaning the situation like we are. Now, I think we can all agree to that. The issue is, how did it come about? And I want to tell you that each of those decisions were made possible by a 5-4 decision. I want to tell you that the one person on that Supreme Court that looks like us was in that 5th vote. All right, so now I'm about to get difficult here. Right?
We don't claim him.
Y'all know who that person was. Now let's take it on home.
Come on.
How did he get there?
Come on.
And what was our role in allowing him to get here? I'm going to tell you the truth. Every time I come to D.C., I have post-traumatic stress. Because I spent one long, ugly week here in 1992.
Come on.
I was part of Anita Hill's defense team.
Come on.
We were struggling to save this seat on the Supreme Court. Day and night, trying to make the argument that this was not a candidate who had our best interests at heart. This was not a candidate that was going to carry on the legacy of Thurgood Marshall. This was not a candidate that gave much interest, I'm not going to say a bad word, about civil rights. In fact, he said that the only thing civil rights organizations were good for was bitching and moaning. This was the man that reversed at the EEOC level the active enforcement of civil rights laws. This was a man that said that his sister, who was on welfare supporting his own parents, was a defensive, entitled black welfare queen. This is a man who showed time and time again that he couldn't care less about African Americans. Now, how did he wind up getting the support of the majority of African Americans? How did that happen? This is intersectional failure. Because before Anita Hill came forward, black folks were kind of, well, I don't know, maybe so, maybe not. When she came forward, it was like instant support for Clarence Thomas. Across the board, his support went up 8 to 9 to 1 in black communities, and these were black communities in the Deep South who could have forced senators to have been accountable to vote against him. What they were telling us, case in point, was, why in the world should I vote against Clarence Thomas when I've got all of these people of color telling me to vote for him, and I certainly won't get any benefit from voting against him from white constituencies. Why were black people prepared to support this? Let's think about it. Here's what they said. She's just carrying an agenda of white women. Oh my God. Sexual harassment is something that does not happen to black women. Sexual harassment is a creation of white feminism, right? All of these ideas are ideas that are patently false. All of these ideas do not tell the truth about what has happened to black women since we got on these shores. Our story is a story of institutionalized sexual harassment. And it's a story that led African American people reflexively to say, well, if a sister is saying something bad about a brother, we got to get behind the brother. That's how we got Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court. So when I say that our intersectional failures, our failure to see ourselves as a coalition, it's not black people and other people as a coalition. We're a coalition among black people, between men and women, between cis and trans, between gay and straight, poor people, elite people. We are a coalition, but we don't act like a coalition. We don't talk about asymmetric solidarity. We don't talk about if I'm ride or die for you, you got to be ride or die for me. That's not part of how we think about black people as political actors, and it is undermining our future not to be able to talk about it. So let me give you 2 examples, because you're asking for examples. When some of us started to go and try to raise the awareness around Trump, Bill O'Reilly put me on his show saying this crazy black feminist is attacking Trump. His basic way of dismissing me is to say, and this is one of these people who's talking about gender when we're talking about President Obama's My Brother's Keeper. It was like, by definition, to actually talk deeply about gender and inclusion meant that we had no credibility to talk about the presidency of the United States. So we were written off as just crazy people, right? So you got that moment. We can talk about more moments when our intersectional failure makes it harder for us to be able to come up with agendas that actually work. You were both talking about the need for an understanding of work and well-being and welfare that's not based on market economies, not based on the idea that you work and you get what you deserve. Well, what about single black women? Come on. What about the fact that they work harder than anybody else and make less than anybody else? What about the fact that African American women's net worth is $5? It's less than their white female counterparts, and I'm sorry, it's less than black males as well. That has everything to do with the well-being of the majority of our families, because the majority of our families rely on a female income for their well-being. Why has that never been part of our agenda? Why have we never talked about that? So here's the last thing. We've been talking about violence, economic violence, political violence, police violence, but have we talked about it in an intersectional way? So I'm just curious about where we're at in this conversation. I'm just curious. I want to ask everybody, put a hand up. Just put your hand up in the air. I want to see something. Everybody, please put your hand up.
I thought we were getting
Thank you. I'm gonna name some names. When you hear a name you don't recognize, I want you to put your hand down. Just want to see where we're at, okay? Eric Garner, Mike Brown, Tamir Rice, Philando Castillo, Michelle Cusseau, Tanisha Anderson. Keep them down, because we want to know what you don't know. Kayla Moore.
That's Berkeley.
India Beatty. Natasha McKenna. So we got about, what, a half dozen hands left up in the room. Now let me tell you something. Every one of these names was someone killed by police. Every one of these names was a black person killed by police. The names you don't know are the sisters who were killed by the police. sometimes by the same police department, sometimes within weeks of the men you know. What does it mean that our agendas are not inclusive of the suffering that our black women face? So we were talking just a few minutes ago about how there's this new interpretation of the law that allows people to kill us simply by saying that they're afraid of us, and that is true. What the partial truth is it's not just about brothers.
Come on.
That's right.
Let me tell you about Natasha McKenna, and if you have not heard about her, Google her, you can see what happened to Natasha McKenna. Natasha McKenna, African-American woman, like Charlene and Niles, suffering from a mental disability, called the police for services, was arrested instead, taken to a jail, left in that jail cell nude for 7 days. 6 white officers in hazmat uniforms dressed up to go and extract her. Her last words were, "You promised not to kill me." They spent the next several minutes tasering her to death. She was tasered 4 times. Now, this is intersectionality. First of all, her vulnerability. She's black, she has mental disabilities, and she's a woman. So she doesn't get to go to some other facility. She is framed as someone who has superhuman strength. 6 police officers have to taser her to death because they were in fear of their lives from a nude black woman who's 5'2".
Come on.
So when we're talking about how racism creates narratives that allow people to kill us, it is all of us who are allowed to be killed. So when we think about intersectionality and movements, it's important to think about intersectionality across movements. We also have to think about intersectionality within our own community. I'm going to leave you with Vicky McAdory. She's the auntie mama of India Beatty, who was killed about 14 months ago. She was a survivor of India's death initially. 2 weeks ago, she died. She died, I think, of a broken heart. She died from a massive stroke. From what? From grieving the death of her daughter, from grieving the fact that the death of her daughter was not on anyone's lips, from grieving the fact that when we say her name, sometimes we don't even say the names of black women. That's what killed Vicky McAdory. She called me the day before she died, and the one thing she said was, no matter what happens, no matter what people say, no matter how much they try to marginalize our issues, no matter how much people run and hide when the question of black women come up, you've got to keep doing this work because our lives depend on it, our communities' lives depend on it, and our nation's lives depend on it.
Come on.
So I know we have Tamika and Linda, you all have to leave early. I don't know what time that is exactly. You need to leave now?
Child, not after that. I can't. That was too good. I mean, I need to leave in like 5 minutes, but that was so powerful.
So I want to give you and Linda an opportunity to briefly just address everyone before you leave. Linda, do you want to?
I just want to say thank you. And that is exactly the spirit in which we did the work of the Women's March, and again, as Linda said, nothing was perfect, but certainly we took that spirit with us that, we really had to force people to see some real deep, dark stuff that they didn't want to see, and that kept us awake a lot of nights, a lot of tears, and even in our own communities, because when black folks were telling us that they weren't going to support us, and as Linda said, even friends, we had to have conversations with people around that, and in the spirit of that, I want to say, that I've had to over this throughout this experience where black folks have said to me, well, I just didn't come because it had, it was too many white women and all of that. I don't necessarily agree with that or even believe it because even when we were on the road walking 250 miles and white folks didn't have anything to do with it, there were black people who wouldn't support us. And so that whole piece of intersectionality, no activist is the perfect activist, no organization is the perfect organization, but we don't get to a point where we can see past our faults and figure out what the common goals are and what the common wins look like. We're missing the mark because our people who are not in the organization running and leading are watching the division among groups, and they fall into those pockets as well. And then when we try to collaborate on things, because of the fact that the leadership has not done what it was supposed to do, people in the group say, I'm not going with that. I won't support them. I won't be a part of that. You can't take me there in that relationship now when we didn't have that relationship to start. So I think we are all in the process of trying to rebuild and rethink what it looks like, what the sisterhood looks like, what the family looks like. And it's a beautiful space to be in, that we can pick up the phone and call folks who we didn't even talk in the past, but we're talking so much more now. And I think it's so important.
Tamika, 1 second,
Okay.
one thing. Again, a point of moderator privilege, we have the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation chairwoman who's joined us. That's Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee. She also has to run out, but we thank you for making sure this convening happens. Thank you, Congresswoman. Yes. Absolutely.
Yes.
Count me in, count the foundation as a friend to new ideas and getting it right. Congresswoman Lee, thank you so very much for doing this and putting us on point. God bless you.
Thank you. And she means that. She's one of the busiest women in Congress, so she means that. Tamika, finish your point.
Really quickly, I just want to make sure, because since the Women's March, people have been drawn to this title, or this event, this historic event, which is important. But we cannot leave here without making sure we lift the Gathering for Justice and Justice League as two networks that we work with, Linda and I, and Carmen Perez is not in this room right now. But we really were so excited about the Women's March because it was an opportunity for us to lift the work that we had already been doing in the street through the Gathering and through Justice League, to bring it to a new space and give it new energy. And so what we want to figure out, and I think this is the most important part of how we go forward, is yes, Women's March, awesome, great space, but when we call and say, okay, now the Gathering is doing XYZ thing, we're marching against the NRA, or we're, putting together some different action, will people respond at that moment and not just when it is the movement that has the glitz and glam? I think that's the real work that we have to do, and really get back to the idea that supporting the smallest grassroots organization on the corner of the block is really where the work is happening. If we can put our resources in those places with the anti-violence group, that's the only thing between the finger and the trigger sometimes on the block. That is the real work. And I think if we're doing that, then that's the real deep movement work that you all were talking about, that I'm so committed to. And I just want to make sure that before we leave, we lift our brother, my son, Lennon, who's in the room with us, that travels with us across the country, supporting women. He was outside by himself for over 30 days, how many days? Supporting Deborah Danner, who's a woman that police shot in her stomach, 65 years old, in the Bronx. He was out there in the rain, and you are so right, Kimberly. Nobody would show up to be there with him, but he said he had to stand up for that woman, because there's no way that a woman that is mentally ill should have been shot to death in her home because she had a bat in her hand. So thank you all so much. I love Black people. I love all of you who are in this room, and thank you so much for having me, Angela. We love you.
Thank you. Linda, you also have to leave. I want to give you a brief moment to respond. I want to make sure that we have an opportunity for audience questions. So if you can just chime in briefly, we want to make sure we give an opportunity for the audience.
So I just wanted to say one more time that I'm very grateful and honored to be in this space, and grateful to call these folks on the stage, my comrades, and just want you to know that the reality on the ground on the outside is that they're doing to us what they've done to folks in history, and we can't let history repeat itself. They will vilify us, they will criminalize us, they will arrest us, and they will say that we are the problem, and we need to make sure that our folks are standing up for us every single day. We have a culture where we're always uplifting Dr. Martin Luther King, but people forget that Dr. Martin Luther King was named the most dangerous man by the FBI, and he was a victim of COINTELPRO and a victim of police brutality, and he wrote us letters from jail. So we got to just make sure what's happening is history is repeating itself. And what I'll say to folks in this room is that we talk a lot about the civil rights movement, and I've done all my history and research on the civil rights movement. We are in a civil rights movement right now. So it's not about who we would have been back when Dr. Martin Luther King was running these streets. The question is, who are we going to be right now? And what I think about also is that sometimes we won't see the fruits of our labor. And that's okay with me. But what I don't want is I don't want another generation after me that says, where was Linda in 2017? Where was our people in 2000? Why is it that I don't have the right to vote anymore? Like, what was those people doing back in those days? And what I want people to say is no matter what happens, that generations to come say we stood up. And we were not silenced, and we were not intimidated, and we continued the legacies of people before us. So I hope that we are all in this for, not for ourselves or for the organizations that we work for, but for the generations to come. And the Native American community taught me something really profound, and it's something that I hold very dearly. They say we don't work for the next generation or 2 generations to come. We work for 7 generations after us. So if we start thinking in that realm, in that long term of what we are doing now to lay the bricks for 7 generations after us to come, I think we will win together.
Thank you, Linda. Okay, so as you all start thinking about your questions, I have one moderator rule, and one moderator rule only. It is that you ask a question. It is very important that you understand we have a robust, talented panel. I'm going to ask Melissa to do me a huge sister friend favor and join us on the panel. She has been in this seat preaching, y'all. So come on, please. Please, join the panel. Can y'all tell Melissa you want to hear from her? Just to come answer questions too. If you can, we would love to have you. She's phenomenal. And I know you all miss her as much as I do on air. But since Tamika and Linda have to go to a panel, I'm hoping that Melissa could do this. Thank you, sis. I appreciate that. So as you all are lining up to ask your questions, we have 21 minutes. And that's not 21 minutes for one question, that's 21 minutes for as many questions and answers as we can get in. This is important work. We want to leave with action items. I know this is important, and we have to make sure that we are working together when we leave here. So as you all are lining up, you got your question and your camera ready.
I have my question and my camera.
All right, give us your name and let us know your
I am
question.
Chastity Neal. I am from Fresno, California, but I am from Chicago, Illinois. We are losing our young black women and men at a tremendous rate by our own hand. How can we activate something to decrease this? I'm sorry, it makes me so emotional.
It's okay.
But how can we do something to decrease this? What can we do? Because I don't see a lot of organizations doing anything about this. And I don't think the world knows that we're losing 500 black people in 2 months in Chicago. Ain't no white people, ain't no Mexican, ain't no Asians. These are all black men and women. So what can we do about this?
Thank you, sis. Thank you.
We have several questions.
If we can, just take her question, just so that, just one person answer from the panel, if we can, one question, one answer. I know that's a heavy question. It's already been a very heavy panel. But if we can, I understand. She said she was crying the whole time. I think it's first important, Rashad, and I would love for you to chime in here the most. I think it's really important that even when we get emotional on these issues, because we do have our young brothers and sisters dying every day, it's also important for us to acknowledge the fact that there are a lot of organizations on the ground doing that work. But I really want, Rashad, I know you have to work with a lot of these folks to just chime in here. To correct the record, and sis, maybe there's somewhere that you can volunteer with, but I don't want us pushing that narrative. I know that's not your intention, but it's a right-wing agenda that we can't allow to even interfere and infect our space, right? So let's go ahead, Rashad.
Yeah, I want to just acknowledge that there are groups on the ground.
Yeah.
And they are working uphill against, once again, a set of rules that are in place in our communities that make getting a gun easier than getting an education,
Yes.
getting health care, getting a job. And so when the structures are set up and the rules and the playing fields are set up to get a set of results, we not only have to sort of work within our communities to deal with the direct service needs in communities, we also have to change the rules. There's a lot that comes from sort of the neoliberal politics, oftentimes of the Democratic Party, around some of these policies, whether it's poverty, whether it's guns, whether it's health care, that we just need to build empathy for those impacted. And I don't believe that. We need to build power. Empathy is what happens when big corporations go into our communities and say, we want to clean up the school instead of helping to actually change it. Empathy is what happens when we work to like give people coats instead of fixing the job. We need to be able to do both. And so I say that we need to support the organizations on the ground doing the heroic efforts, but we also need to change the structures, the ways in which the banks, the ways in which politicians, the ways in which our criminal justice system have made getting a gun and using a gun easier than getting all sorts of access to the type of things that uplift us.
Where on the south side, or where in Chicago are you? You're west side. Oh, North Lawndale. Okay, so I want you to connect with Charlene Carruthers. And I want you to connect with BYP 100.
Absolutely.
All right? So, because they're doing both sets of work. So they're on the ground, they're extraordinary. The work that they are doing is both changing the rules of the game and just straight up work. So I want you to connect with Charlene Carruthers, with Jessica, who's FM Supreme. They're South Side and West Side, but I think if you connect with BYP 100 and all the work that they're doing there. So I got a lot of folks in Chicago. We all got a lot of folks in Chicago. I feel you, but like BYP 100, I think is a place where you will right away feel that connection.
Thank you. Next question.
Yes, my name is Attorney Robin McCoy, and I have a law firm in Ann Arbor. I also work with the Michigan Children's Law Center, which is based in Detroit. My question is, I do educational advocacy, and I've been practicing for 16 years, and I feel, I really, again, I applaud you guys for what you've been doing. I've been in the trenches myself. I've seen the criminal. I was just at the National Association of Criminal Defense Attorneys. They said we shouldn't even call it the criminal justice system. It's the criminal court system because there is no justice. Yeah. What Spirit led me to do, I've been doing programming for the last 3 years. It's called What to Do When Stopped by the Police, where I go and educate kids and bring the police in there and have an in-depth discussion about how to deal with the police. The kids have said back to me,
There are 6 people behind you.
The police have said back to me, the kids have said back to me, what are you doing with the police? So I've worked with the police as well, but I have a couple of things.
I need one of them to be a question.
Okay, I understand that what you guys are talking about with the political system here, making the change, that's important, but what efforts have been done as far as going to the United Nations? Because Malcolm X was talking about the plight of the Negro, okay, we need to go to the United Nations. That's the first thing. Second thing is educational advocacy. I see a lot of problems in the Detroit public school system, so I just want to make sure that you guys are making that a part of your platform.
Can I offer something? Please. So part of what I think is important, and I appreciate your comments, what every single person up here said was that this can't be a, what are you guys doing? This has to be a, how can I do this in my community too? Yes. And so what I heard from you was, I'm doing a lot of work to make sure that people know their rights. I'm doing a lot of work to make sure that our education system is the best that it can be. And part of what I think could expand your work in your community is continuing to build a local movement that then connects with movements that are happening in other states, other cities, other neighborhoods. But I do feel like we have to stop doing that. What are y'all gonna do? Because I'm a partner with you. I'm a co-conspirator with you. But I don't have superpowers. I don't have superpowers, right? I just popped off on Facebook, created some space for some folk, you know what I mean? Mike Brown got killed, and people went and took over Ferguson, and they still got it taken over to keep it 100. So I think, and I say this intentionally because, lots of people say, oh, you guys are leaderless, and that's cool, but like, who's the leader and all this stuff? And I'm like, we are the leader. Nobody's coming to save us. Yeah. We have to save each other. All right. So I want to be in that kind of relationship with you.
Amazing. So I guess I want to make sure that I'm clear. I need you to ask one question. And you can say your name, because we're hashtag say her name and his name and whoever else's name today, but I also just need you to get to your question. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Okay.
Because we're co-conspirators together.
You feel me? Yes.
My name is Brittany Burnham. I'm from Houston, Texas. I'm a communications associate with the Coalition on Human Needs Out Here. My question is about maintaining a safe space. How can we do that for Black women in organizations that are Black male-centered on their own experiences? So that's very important to me.
Love. Professor Crenshaw, please bless us.
How did I feel there?
You're getting ready. I saw it in your shoulders. Do it.
Yeah. Well, again, this is how we work together. I think that this is the ability to even name that it's a challenge, I think, is number one, to disrupt the normalcy or the expectation that there are gender-determined roles in organizations, gender-determined agendas, gender-determined priorities. So some part of how we do say her name, some part of the work of the African American Policy Forum is actually talk about the consequences of that structure, right? Historically and in contemporary terms. Sometimes it involves stretching our historical understanding far beyond where we are. I just got back from seeing Rosa Parks' house that got auctioned off here in Detroit, and someone had to buy it and take it to Berlin and reconstruct it there. My sense is that if we can't hold up Rosa Parks' legacy, if we can't reimagine her, not just as a woman who started the bus boycott because her feet were tired, but as a black woman who had actually created the infrastructure that led to the Montgomery Improvement Society, as a black woman who actually founded an organization that went deep into Alabama to support black women who'd been raped by white people and had not been prosecuted. If we can't see her and her vision of political organizing among our people as something valuable and to hold up and not let someone have to take her legacy over to Germany, if we can't do that, then the things that we're doing on the ground in our organization, they will be much more difficult to do. So I think consciousness raising about the role that gender has played in our movements, consciousness raising about the consequences of not lifting that up, and consciousness raising about what happens when we don't have a fully anti-racist agenda that's fully grounded in resisting patriarchy as well as racism.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Daniel Driver Molino, and I am here with Black Women Organized for Political Action out of Oakland, California. And my question is, in light of your comments, Professor Crenshaw, Black women are the base of the Democratic Party, and even they aren't honoring us, so how can we hold them accountable without further fracturing the party?
Sometimes things need to be fractured. Who's going to take this on? I think Melissa has to take that one.
I'm done. Go ahead, please.
Come on, church.
Oh, you want to take it? I mean, so I think you fractured the fucking party. I'll be real clear about this. I think when Dr. Crenshaw's point about walking in and seeing Congresswoman Lee sitting there is an extremely powerful image. And part of the reason it brought me to tears is because I recognize very clearly the ways in which it's also an image about Dr. Crenshaw herself, who leveled a critique against the Obama White House relative to the failure of that White House to have an analysis about the vulnerability of black girls in its work around My Brother's Keeper. It was a fair critique. It was a reasonable critique. It was not over the top. It was not personal. It was scholarly, and it was based on both her empirical work and her expertise. In response to her critique, she was shut out of the White House for the rest of the administration. When I say shut out, I mean that when the Anna Julia Cooper Center, which is the center that I direct at Wake Forest University, hosted an intersectional conference there in 2015 in order to finally try to push the White House Council on Women and Girls to openly do work that was focused around women and girls of color. We tried during the entire 3-month run-up to the conference to simply invite Dr. Crenshaw, simply to invite her. And were blocked by the White House in terms of just putting her on the invitation list until about maybe 36 hours before. And then we're finally allowed to, in a way that is kind of clearly and obviously
Not making it possible to.
well, impossible and rude. And fracturing of a long existing relationship between sister scholars. Meanwhile, Ta-Nehisi Coates, who has not even a bachelor's degree, and wrote a book that won a National Book Award while not citing one woman scholar and simply waving his hand at the experience of African American women by saying to his son in the piece, "Oh, son, you'll never really know the experience of women," leveled a much harsher critique at the Obama White House early on, and then was repeatedly re-invited to the White House throughout the entire Obama years, and was basically made the racial journalist of the Obama years, a good friend of the Obama White House and administration, and allowed to basically write the history unto this madness of the white president that he wrote recently, in which he waves away all white supremacy before Trump in the first paragraph. Now, when I hear Dr. Crenshaw talk about Congresswoman Lee sitting alone as the only real leader in a room while a bunch of backslapping boys are in the corner, what happens to me as a scholar is I see Ta-Nehisi Coates, college dropout with a National Book Award, prancing around, speaking on the presidency, while a scholar who holds appointments at both Columbia and UCLA and performed what you just saw, shut out of a White House for simply saying, "Have you noticed, sir, who has 2 daughters, that maybe you should keep more than just our sons?" So, on top of all of that, there is a strategic problem here. So let me just walk through that real swift, much more swiftly, because I know my sister Angela Rye going to tell me about myself. Let's just real fast go to the Supreme Court problem, which already Dr. Crenshaw has laid out for you, which already put our friend on the court, because remember that not only everything that Dr. Crenshaw already said, but also that the man who was leading that Senate Judiciary Confirmation panel was Senator Joe Biden. So when we think about discursive violence over and against women's bodies, which gets waved away and not really noticed, it ain't just Republicans who then vote for and ignore discursive violence, such as pussy grabbing. It is also Democrats who have no problem forgetting discursive violence about women's bodies. It just depends on which women's bodies. So if there is discursive violence about black women's bodies, it can be very easily forgiven and forgotten and never brought up again. Because Brother Joe is simply forgotten how he participated in that. So when he becomes VP, fine, maybe he grew. But whatever he grew or didn't grow, we know that he never apologized. So at the end, when they see what's happening in the world, when they know that black women are the key, when they have one last opportunity to make a pick for the court, and they know that that pick is never going to get a vote. Never going to get a vote. Never going to get a vote. But what they could do is pick someone who could get voters out. Someone particular. Because see, voters don't just vote on like the Supreme Court. They vote on like, all right, who's going to get me to the polls? So put somebody there languishing, waiting. Because you remember when Loretta Lynch was languishing and waiting, and you know, we was like, oh, it's day 1, it's day 2, it's day 4, it's day 12, it's day 20. Remember, think about what Rashad would have done. Oh, you say what? Now let me just say what might have happened if, say, for example, somebody had picked a black woman for that position. Or let's say a particular black woman. Let's say people had thought they had a chance to put Ms. Hill right next to Mr. Thomas for the rest of time. What if voting for Hillary Clinton had not been just voting for Hillary Clinton, but voting for Hillary Clinton and putting Anita Hill on the court? Now, I don't even know whether or not that's possible. It's a freaking thought experiment that sometimes just gives me a little joy. But I'm just saying saying from a damn strategic point of view, don't pick some white boy whose name you and I now don't remember. Pick somebody, because black women just weren't that damn excited about Hillary. I don't give a shit what is right, wrong, or documentary. I'm talking about politics. Give me somebody who Rashad can send me a goddamn countdown email every day about. On today, Sister Girl is still waiting. Melissa, the doctors and the AKAs and the Zetas, and everybody will be like, oh, we walking to the polls today because the sister is still waiting.
Okay, Melissa, I got to so they can get these questions. Okay, but hey, I told you! I told you! Oh my God. So she rolled her eyes at me coming up here, but I told y'all. Okay, come on, sis.
Until they figured out.
Thank you, Melissa. Yes.
My name is Sheila Holt Orsted, and I'm an angry black
Come
mom.
a little bit closer, just a minute.
My name is Sheila Holt Orsted, and I'm an angry black mama. My daughter was told that she could not try out for a university basketball team because she was black. We sued them, we won.
Yes.
But I just wanted to thank Rashad Robertson. I can tell you the color of change. We contacted them, and I'm so sad to find out that Thomas Buford is going to be leaving. My daughter and I cried because he came in, y'all, the color change. They came in, found out that they were Nike sponsored. Within about a week, he was ready to, Nike sponsored, what's the other big one?
Under Armour.
Under Armour were they sponsors that they paid for a lot of things at this school. He had a letter ready to tell them color change was calling to shut them down and that's the kind of work they do. And I want to thank all of you for the work that you do, but please, everybody, apply the color change.
Write him a check. So everyone, I really hate to do this. I know. They need us out of this room. And I really apologize. What I would like to have done is I'm sure that we have to take a panelist photo really quickly. To Congresswoman Lee, if you could join me up here. I just want to thank Congresswoman Lee for all of the work that she does on our behalf when we're watching and when we're not watching, for laying the groundwork for activism, for everybody in this room, for letting us stand on her shoulders, for letting us stand alongside of her. We thank you. We love you. If we can take this picture really quick, then you all can come up here and ask questions. Thank you for your patience with us. Thank you in advance for the work you're going to do at home. God bless you. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
No, I just got to thank you, Angela. First of all, you did such a phenomenal job.
Yeah.
Really. You know, and I think this panel really, first of all, it was real. Secondly, I think we know what we have to do when we go home. And I'm just going to ask you, remember, we got to stop this repeal of this bad, horrible health care bill, Cassidy Graham. So let's use some of the kind of principles and thoughts and ideas that this panel has given to us to defeat that. But secondly, I just want to say to Alicia and the panel, you know, you inspired me to introduce legislation to get rid of those Confederate statutes in the Capitol. And so I ask your members of Congress to sign on as co-sponsors of this bill. Another question or an issue that was raised was the United Nations. And I just have to say one thing about the UN, because my sister was absolutely right. I'm the Democratic representative to the United Nations, but I want to say that the Congressional Black Caucus is affiliated. It's not the caucus, but it's not the foundation. We have an institute, and we receive NGO status. And so the CBCI will have NGO status at the UN to begin to discuss a lot of the issues as it relates to African Americans in our own country. So thank you all again. You all are an audience and a panel that, as Webster Dictionary has put out the definition of stay woke with using one of my quotes, I want our panelists to have one of my stay woke buttons, and we'll try to get everyone one. So thank you guys again.
Come in the middle.
Good to see you. Oh, always good to see you. Okay, we were looking at Christopher first. Christopher, ready? Ready?
I just need to
Make sure our eyes are open.
Okay, I gotta run you off, but
Thank you. Thank you for having